IN Vintage Diaries, a movie about a teenager left alone for the weekend, produced performances and scenes that got permanently burned into cinema history? Well, released in 1983, Risky Business followed Joel Goodson, played by Tom Cruise, a straight-laced suburban kid with a college application, a pristine house, and absolutely no business making the decisions that he was about to make. Rebecca Dew played Lana, the cool, unreadable outsider. What ended up on screen felt bold enough, and what happened behind the scenes was a different story entirely. And today we're going to count down 15 weird facts about Risky Business that you probably never knew. And stick around for number one, because before it became one of the most recognized titles of the decade, this film had a name so forgettable the studio killed it before it even reached a poster. And before we jump in, don't forget to like, subscribe, and ring that bell cause it helps YouTube show this to more retro movie fans just like you. Alright, grab those sunglasses and your dad's most crisp white button-down. Let's get into it. Number 15. The famous dance scene had almost no script. The most famous 30 seconds of Risky Business came with exactly one line of direction. Dance to rock music. That was it. That was the entire script for the most iconic moment of the decade. Tom Cruise and Paul Brickman talked through the broad strokes beforehand, covering where to start and where to move, but once the camera rolled, everything else was completely on Cruise. The candlestick microphone, the furniture climbing, the total commitment of a man performing for an audience that simply didn't exist. All of it was improvised on the day. Then the floor itself became a problem. The surface was too grippy, turning the planned entrance into something closer to aggressive sock shuffling. Cruise's fix was to dust one section for the glide and put sticky tape on the other side, so he could hit his mark without taking out a wall. Two-zone floor management, and it worked beautifully. Director Paul Brickman chose old-time rock and roll because he wanted the scene to feel timeless, something that wouldn't date the film no matter when you watched it. Every kid in America tried to recreate that moment the second their parents pulled out of the driveway, and they were faithfully copying a complete accident. Number 14. Nearly every major actor of the 80s was up for the same role. Before Tom Cruise slid across that hardwood floor, the role of Joel Goodson was being seriously considered by an audition list that reads like a Hollywood yearbook nobody expected to find. Tom Hanks, Nicolas Cage, John Cusack, Michael J. Fox, Sean Penn, Kevin Bacon, Gary Sinise, Matt Dillon, and Timothy Hutton were all in consideration for the same suburban teenager who accidentally turns his parents' house into a business operation. The multiverse version of this film, where any one of those names lands the role, is a genuinely different movie in almost every direction. Paul Brickman wanted a very specific blend of vulnerability and credibility that could carry a character perpetually in over his head. Not the easiest combination to find when your casting pool keeps producing people who became the biggest stars of the next 3 decades. The role of Lana had its own alternate timeline. Michelle Pfeiffer was offered the part and passed. Kim Basinger wasn't enthusiastic about the script. Sharon Stone also auditioned. The casting process was treating future stardom as a minor detail not worth factoring in. Rebecca De Mornay got the role and brought a combination of control and unpredictability that made Lana genuinely unnerving in exactly the right way. In hindsight, it feels like the only logical outcome, but at the time it was one decision away from being an entirely different film. Number 13. Tom Cruise had to trick his way into getting cast. Paul Brickman watched Cruise in taps and walked away with one clear impression. This guy is too intense to play a suburban teenager figuring out economics. He wasn't wrong. Cruise carried a volatile, coiled energy that wasn't the right vibe for the stumbling Joel Goodson. So Cruise's agent made quiet adjustments without telling her client. She arranged for Cruise to drop by Brickman's office during a break from filming The Outsiders, ambushing the director with a casual hello that was anything but. Cruise walked in exactly as he'd come from set. Greasy hair, jean jacket, a chipped front tooth still uncapped from his Outsiders character, an Oklahoma accent still running, and a tattoo he hadn't washed off. He hadn't planned any of it. He simply hadn't had time to clean up. The accidental transformation worked exactly like an intentional one. Brickman grew interested. Cruise flew back to Tulsa, finished The Outsiders, then returned for a proper screen test opposite De Mornay, who was already cast. By his own admission, the test didn't go well. Brickman cast him anyway on pure instinct, which is either a tremendous leap of faith or the best casting decision of 1983. Probably both. To look convincingly younger on camera, Cruise then shed 14 pounds in 5 weeks through jogging and strict dieting, then deliberately switched to a diet designed to restore just enough softness to his face to read as a teenager. The performance that launched his career into the stratosphere was a carefully constructed illusion built entirely before the cameras ever rolled. Number 12. The film rescued Ray-Ban from near total obscurity. Before risky business, Ray-Ban wayfarers were quietly dying. Sales had bottomed out at around 18,000 pairs per year in 1981, and Bosch and Loam was actively considering pulling the plug on the Wayfarer line entirely. Then Cruise put them on, and the brand's accountants needed a significantly bigger spreadsheet. Ray-Ban had signed a $50,000 per year deal with a product placement company in 1982, covering roughly 60 film and TV appearances annually. Most landed quietly in the background where nobody noticed. But sunglasses on the guy who just slid across the hardwood floor in his underwear in front of the entire country, that's something else entirely. Sales jumped an estimated 2,000% from that 1981 low. 360,000 pairs sold in 1983 alone. By 1986, after additional appearances in The Breakfast Club, Miami Vice, and Moonlighting, that number climbed to 1.5 million annually. Joel Goodson had an attitude that happened to come with sunglasses attached, and that image alone was enough to pull an entire brand back from extinction and turn it into the defining visual shorthand for 80s cool. Ray-Ban expanded from 2 styles to around 40 models by 1989, rebuilding the whole operation on the back of one character's wardrobe choice. Number 11. The Porsche got one shot to hit the water correctly. Watching a Porsche 928 slowly roll off a dock and disappear into Lake Michigan is genuinely painful, and not just for Joel. But most people don't know that wasn't one car, or even 2. The production used 6 Porsches across filming and post-production, and not one exactly matched the 928 as it appears on screen. Different model years, different wheels, different transmissions, all edited together into a single car that technically didn't exist. The one designated for the water had been completely gutted. No engine, no drivetrain, no V8, partly for budget reasons and partly because Illinois state pollution laws prohibited sinking a fully loaded vehicle into Lake Michigan. With the engine removed, the car's nose sits noticeably higher than normal as it teeters on the pier. It's visible right there in the finished film. The crew called it the dump car, an impressively casual name for something carrying the weight of the entire sequence on its hollow frame. Porsche had nothing to do with any of it and reportedly distanced themselves from the production entirely. They came around eventually when your car gets a line like Porsche. There is no substitute delivered directly to camera. The hero Porsche that survived the whole production went into private ownership and sold at auction in 2021 for $1.98 million. A world record for any Porsche 928 ever made. Number 10. The tension between Tom Cruise and Rebecca De Mornay's characters was real because the chemistry between them was genuinely real. The on-screen electricity between Joel and Lana didn't require much acting, largely because Cruise and De Mornay had developed an actual off-screen relationship by the time those scenes were filmed. De Mornay's first impression of Cruise was simply that he was very annoying. Extremely annoying, by her own description. But he grew on her. Filming then moved to Chicago, and things got considerably more complicated. De Mornay was still with Harry Dean Stanton at the time. Curtis Armstrong's memoir describes Stanton spending his days slowly swimming the hotel pool for hours while De Mornay was on set, an image so loaded with dramatic irony it could have been a deleted scene. The cast watched the entire situation developing from a mile away and had the good sense to say nothing. Eventually, the inevitable happened. Stanton went home, and the 2.5-year relationship between Cruise and De Mornay that followed went largely undiscussed publicly for decades. De Mornay didn't speak openly about it until 2023. Number 9. The ending Paul Brickman built wasn't the one audiences paid to see. His original cut closed darker. Joel and Lana sit in a restaurant at the top of the John Hancock building, and the weight of every choice Joel made hangs heavily over the scene. That was always the intended ending. What Brickman didn't want was the lighter park scene the studio bolted on afterward, where Joel and Lana exchange easy banter and everything resolves into something softer than the story had earned. That single addition completely rewired the tone of the entire film. Geffen Films determined that Brickman's level of ambiguity wasn't something they could effectively sell. Multiple cuts were screened before test audiences, carefully measuring how much sustained discomfort people would sit with on a night out. At one point, Brickman refused to direct the new ending himself. The studio's response was that they'd find someone who would. The ending that survived was the one that played best in a room full of strangers with scorecards, not necessarily the one with the most honesty or the most to say. Number 8. The studio dressed up a genuinely dark film and sold it as a party movie. Risky Business arrived with a $6.2 million budget and a producer who wasn't feeling particularly confident. David Geffen's concern was basic survival in a competitive marketplace. The film didn't fit neatly into any existing category audiences were reliably buying tickets for. So Geffen repositioned it before it ever reached a theater. Without the marketing budget to fight directly, the film got packaged as something familiar, a lighthearted teen sex comedy broadly in the mold of Porky's. The sharper, darker material underneath was quietly folded into something that looked accessible from the outside. It was a lean strategy built around limited resources, and it worked considerably better than anyone had any right to expect. The film finished as the 10th highest-grossing release of 1983, earning over $63 million on a budget that gave it almost no business competing at that level. Number 7. The director, who made one cultural landmark and then quietly walked away from all of it. Risky Business was Paul Brickman's directorial debut. It launched Cruise into a different stratosphere, defined a specific flavor of 80s cool, and left Hollywood ready to hand Brickman whatever he wanted next. What he apparently wanted was very little of it. Rain Man was offered to him. Forrest Gump was offered to him, a script he reportedly put down after 12 pages when it put him to sleep. Two films that collected 10 Academy Awards between them and became defining landmarks of American cinema. Brickman passed on both, which in Hollywood terms is roughly equivalent to declining two separate winning lottery tickets while everyone around you stares in silence. He moved out of Los Angeles almost immediately after Risky Business released, described himself as coming from the J.D. Salinger School of Public Visibility, and refused the spotlight most first-time directors with a hit that size would have sprinted toward. He made one more film, 1990's Men Don't Leave with Jessica Lange, before stepping away from directing entirely. It underperformed. He never directed again. Years later, Brickman summarized his own post-Risky Business career with remarkable candor. I squandered a really good career. What can I say? Number 6. Tangerine Dream scored the film with music they had already written for something else. Risky Business carries a specific feeling that's hard to pin down, something between a memory and a daydream, slightly unreal around its edges. That atmosphere didn't happen by accident, and a significant portion of the credit belongs to Tangerine Dream's electronic score. 3 of their 5 contributions weren't composed for the film at all. They pulled from their existing catalog, reworked older material, gave it new titles, and dropped it in as though written specifically for that story. Lana was a reworked excerpt of their 1979 track, Force Majeure. Guido the Killer Pimp came from Cloudburst Flight off the same album. Composer Steve Reich later called the score an outright theft of his music for 18 musicians and said he should have sued. The score that defined the film's entire emotional atmosphere was assembled from borrowed and repurposed parts, which means Tangerine Dream pulled the exact same move Joel Goodson pulled throughout the entire movie. Number 5. How Joey Pants crashed a party nobody invited him to. Before he was Ralph Cifaretto on The Sopranos or the man you definitely shouldn't have trusted in The Matrix, Joe Pantoliano was Guido the Killer Pimp, and he nearly didn't get the role. David Geffen had opinions. Specifically that Pantoliano didn't remind him of any pimp he personally knew, which raises considerably more questions about David Geffen than about Joe Pantoliano. Producers John Avnet and Steve Tisch along with Brickman held firm and protected the casting. Pantoliano got the role over Geffen's direct objection and delivered a character so precisely threatening that Guido became one of the most memorable supporting performances in the film. Risky Business was his breakthrough. The Goonies, Midnight Run, The Matrix, Memento, and an Emmy for The Sopranos all trace back to a role one of Hollywood's most powerful executives didn't think he was right for. Number 4. The train scene was built entirely around a real city that had no interest in accommodating a film crew. The Chicago Transit Authority is thanked in the credits of Risky Business, which sounds routine until you understand what earning that acknowledgement actually required. Brickman knew exactly what the train meant to the story. The North Shore suburbs represented safety. The L was the physical line connecting Joel to everything his carefully managed world was not. The train was the entire journey, made literal. Getting it on film was another matter entirely. The scene was shot on a real L car moving through Chicago at night, working around real schedules on a transit system that had been running long before anyone showed up with a camera and wasn't adjusting for anyone's shot list. During the Christmas production break, Brickman wrote new material to bridge existing footage. Editor Richard Chu built the gradual slow-motion sequence cut by cut and frame by frame, calculated entirely on paper because no digital tools existed yet to do that work. Extras exited at successive stops, the train emptying one person at a time until Joel and Lana were the only two people left inside it together. That mounting isolation wasn't a camera trick. It was logistics dressed up as atmosphere, constructed in pieces across months on a train that didn't care about any of it. Number 3. The Goodson house became a tourist destination for entirely the wrong reason. The Highland Park, Illinois home at 1258 Linden Avenue, used for exterior shots of the Goodson house, is a real address on a real street in a real neighborhood that had no idea what was coming. After Risky Business hit theaters, it stopped being somebody's private home and became everybody's pilgrimage destination. Fans would show up regularly, drive slowly past, and stand on the sidewalk staring at a perfectly ordinary suburban house with a reverence usually reserved for actual historical landmarks, half expecting Tom Cruise to appear at the front door. Then came the photos because of course they did. Here is the detail that makes the whole pilgrimage slightly absurd. The dance scene wasn't filmed there. The interior shots, including the living room floor itself, were captured inside the gymnasium of Niles East High School in Skokie, a closed school dressed and lit to pass as a private residence. The location that launched 1,000 sock slides was never a house at all. Fans were making dedicated trips to photograph a building that had nothing to do with the moment they traveled there to celebrate. None of that slowed the tourism down. The mythology of the location had permanently replaced the actual geography of it. Number 2. Risky Business invented a storytelling template that Hollywood spent a decade recycling. Before Risky Business, the teenager at the center of a movie was generally navigating a crush, surviving high school, or absorbing a life lesson that sent everyone home feeling warm. Joel Goodson had a different agenda entirely. He was running a full-scale business operation out of his parents' house, complete with logistics, overhead, and a criminal element that complicated the profit margin considerably. The film placed a teenager inside an adult economic system and treated the arrangement with complete seriousness, and that framing was genuinely new enough in 1983 to feel startling. 3 years later, John Hughes set Ferris Bueller's Day Off in the same Chicago suburbs, built around the same premise of a teenager seizing total control the moment the adults cleared out. When Cameron Crowe made Jerry Maguire in 1996, he told Cruise directly that Joel Goodson had significantly shaped that film's central character. A sports agent running his own desperate operation on nothing but nerve and questionable decisions. The shadow Risky Business, cast across the decade that followed, it was longer than most people ever stopped to measure. Number 1. The movie almost had a title that absolutely nobody would have remembered. Risky Business was originally called White Boys Off the Lake. Let that sit for a moment. White Boys Off the Lake. The title makes technical sense when you map it against the geography. Suburban Chicago, wealthy kids, Lake Michigan in the background. Paul Brickman built the name around the setting and the film's central demographic, which is a reasonable approach to titling a movie that also guaranteed nobody outside a very small radius would feel urgency to go see it. The studio took one look and moved on immediately. They understood something fundamental. A title does a substantial portion of the selling before a single frame runs. White Boys Off the Lake sounds like a regional documentary screening once at a community center on a Tuesday evening. It does not sound like a film that would define 1983 and shape a decade of popular culture. Risky Business was sharper, more charged, carrying exactly the right mixture of intrigue and mild menace. The kind of title that tells you just enough to make you need the rest. The original name didn't completely disappear, though. It survived as a quiet piece of dialogue inside the finished film, a small inside joke for anyone paying close enough attention to catch it. And there you have it. 15 weird and wild facts about Risky Business. What surprised you the most? Share this with a friend who still thinks socks on hardwood floors count as a legitimate life skill. And subscribe so we can see you next time.